I don't even know where to begin. You know how some things happen in life, and no matter how much time passes, you still can't quite wrap your head around them? That's what this is for me. It's one of those stories you tell only once, and only to the right person, someone you know will understand. That's why I'm telling you, because I feel like you'll listen, really listen without judgment. I never expected this. Not in a million years. If you had told me 6 months ago that my life would take such a strange, shocking turn, I would have laughed in your face. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and sometimes those curveballs hit you square in the chest, knocking the breath right out of you. It all started the day my daughter introduced me to her boyfriend. Her name is Emma, my only child, my pride and joy. She's in her early 20s, that golden age where the world is wide open, and everything feels possible. I've always tried my best to be a good mother. Not a perfect one, because who can claim that? But a good one. I raised her on my own after her father walked out when she was 10. It wasn't easy, but I did it. I worked 2 jobs, made sacrifices, and did everything in my power to make sure she never felt like she was missing anything. So when she came home one day, eyes bright, cheeks flushed, and told me she'd met someone, I was happy for her. Every mother wants to see her daughter happy. But when she said his name, Jake, something about the way she said it made me pause. I don't know why. Maybe it was just motherly intuition. That little whisper in the back of my mind warning me to pay attention. He's amazing, Mom, she gushed. Smart, funny, kind. You're going to love him. I wanted to. For her sake, I wanted to love him. When the day finally came for me to meet him, I was nervous. Not for any specific reason, just that usual worry that every parent has. Will he treat her well? Will he make her happy? Will he break her heart? And then I opened the door. The moment I saw him, I knew something was different. I can't explain it. It wasn't that he looked bad, on the contrary, he was almost too perfect. Tall, lean, well-dressed, with a charming smile that seemed just a little too practiced. His eyes locked onto mine in a way that made me feel exposed, as if he could see straight through me. This is Jake, Emma said, oblivious to the strange tension in the air. I forced a smile. Nice to meet you, Jake. He held out his hand, and when I took it, I felt it. Something unspoken passing between us. A strange energy. A silent understanding that neither of us acknowledged out loud. That was the beginning. And if I had known what was coming, if I had even the faintest idea, I never would have let him step foot inside my home. But I did. And that's when everything changed. From the moment Jake stepped into my home, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this presence about him. Have you ever met someone who makes you feel uneasy, even when they haven't done anything wrong? That was him. But I didn't say anything. I smiled, offered him a seat, and did my best to be welcoming. For Emma's sake. She was so happy. Her eyes sparkled every time she looked at him, and she held his hand like she never wanted to let go. I watched them as they sat together on the couch, laughing, whispering little things to each other. And in that moment, I told myself I was just being overprotective, paranoid even. Maybe I was just afraid of losing my little girl to a serious relationship. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But then he looked at me. It was just a brief moment, half a second maybe, but it sent a chill through my entire body. His eyes, deep and unreadable, met mine with something I couldn't quite define. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't hostility. It was something else entirely. Something that made my stomach twist. I looked away first. That should have been my first warning. The first few weeks were normal, I suppose. Jake was around more and more, spending time with Emma, sometimes even staying over. I kept my distance as much as possible, but he made that difficult. He had a way of inserting himself into everything. I'd be in the kitchen making coffee, and suddenly he'd be there, leaning against the counter like he belonged there. Morning, he'd say, his voice smooth, too confident. Morning, I'd reply, keeping it short, keeping it polite. Then there were the small touches. Not inappropriate, not exactly, but too familiar. A hand grazing mine when I passed him something. A lingering touch on my shoulder when he moved past me in a narrow hallway. Things so subtle that if I mentioned them to anyone, they'd think I was imagining it. But I wasn't. And then came the staring. I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. Late at night, when Emma was asleep, I'd go to the kitchen for a glass of water. And there he'd be, sitting in the dim light of the living room, eyes fixed on me. He wouldn't say a word. Just watch. One night I finally confronted him. Is something wrong? I asked, my voice firmer than I felt. He smiled, slow, calculated. No. Just thinking. About what? His gaze didn't waver. You. The air in the room changed. My pulse quickened. I swallowed hard. You shouldn't say things like that. He chuckled, standing up, moving closer. Too close. You know, he murmured. You and Emma look so much alike. It's uncanny. I stepped back, putting distance between us. Go to bed, Jake. He held my gaze a moment longer before finally obeying. But I didn't sleep that night. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't in my head. This was real. And it was only the beginning. After that night, I started seeing Jake differently. Not just as my daughter's boyfriend, but as something else entirely. Something I didn't want to name. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. That he was just being friendly. That I was imagining the way his eyes lingered a second too long. The way his presence unsettled me. But deep down I knew better. Then came the messages. Started with a simple text. Jake can't sleep. It was nearly midnight. I frowned at my phone, confused. Why was he texting me? Had he meant to message Emma instead? Before I could decide whether to ignore it, another message came in. Jake, are you awake? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe he was just being friendly. But it didn't feel friendly. I didn't reply. The next morning when I saw him, he acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed Emma on the cheek, joked with her over breakfast, played the perfect boyfriend. But when our eyes met, I saw it again, that look. That quiet challenge. That knowing. I should have told Emma. I should have told him to stay away. But I didn't. And that was my second mistake. A few nights later it escalated. Emma had gone out with friends and Jake had stayed behind, saying he wasn't feeling well. I had planned to keep my distance, to stay in my room and avoid any interaction with him. But as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed again. Jake, come downstairs. I stared at the message, my pulse pounding in my ears. Jake, please. I should have ignored it. I should have locked my door and pretended I never saw it. But I didn't. I hesitated, then made my way downstairs, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the living room, I found him sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. What do you want, Jake? I kept my voice firm, steady. He looked up, and for the first time he didn't have that cocky smile. He looked tormented. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his voice low. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Stop. I'm serious, he insisted, running a hand through his hair. It's driving me crazy. You feel it too. I know you do. I took a step back, shaking my head. You're with my daughter. He stood up slowly, carefully. I know. Then this conversation is over. I turned to leave, but before I could, his hand caught my wrist. A breath hitched in my throat. I froze. Just tell me, he whispered. Tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll walk away. I yanked my arm free. Get out. He exhaled sharply, his jaw clenching. Emma will never forgive you for this, I warned. A slow, humorless smile spread across his face. For what? I haven't done anything. I stared at him, my hands shaking. Not yet, he added. That was the moment I realized something chilling. Jake wasn't just playing games. He was waiting for me to break. And I had no idea how much longer I could hold myself together. For the next few days, I avoided Jake as much as possible. When Emma was around, everything seemed normal, too normal. He played the role of the perfect boyfriend effortlessly, charming and attentive, making her laugh like nothing had ever happened between us. But when we were alone, even for a second, he'd find a way to remind me. A lingering glance. A knowing smirk. A touch that lasted just a fraction too long. I felt like I was losing my mind. One evening, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes, my thoughts tangled in knots. Emma was upstairs in her room, probably on the phone with a friend, and Jake, well, I wasn't sure where he was. Then I felt it. That presence behind me. I didn't turn around. Didn't have to. I knew it was him. Do you ever get lonely? His voice was soft, almost gentle. My hands tightened around the dish I was holding. Jake, stop. He moved closer. I could feel his breath near my shoulder. You deserve to be happy too. I spun around, stepping back, putting distance between us. This has to end. He just smiled. Not an apology, not regret, just quiet amusement. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he walked away. I stood there shaking. This wasn't just a flirtation to him. This wasn't just some stupid game. Jake wanted to break me. And worse, he was starting to succeed. The breaking point came one night when Emma was out late with friends. I had the house to myself, at least I thought I did. I was in my room reading, trying to distract myself, when I heard it. A soft knock on my bedroom door. I froze. For a second, I told myself I had imagined it. But then it came again, a slow, deliberate tap. My heart pounded. I knew who it was. I got out of bed, moving cautiously, and opened the door just an inch. Jake stood there, shirtless. I sucked in a sharp breath, my fingers tightening around the doorknob. "What the hell are you doing?" I hissed. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression infuriatingly calm. "Couldn't sleep. Go back to your room, Jake. Now." He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "You look beautiful like this. All soft and undone." A flash of heat, anger, something else coursed through me. "You need to leave." But he didn't move. Instead, he reached up and traced the edge of my jaw with his fingertips. I slapped his hand away. "Enough." He chuckled. "You can pretend all you want, but we both know the truth." I wanted to scream at him, to shove him, to throw him out of my house. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You'll crack eventually." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, breathless, shaken, and more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. Because the scariest part? Somewhere deep down, I was starting to believe he was right. After that night, something changed. It wasn't just me anymore. Emma started noticing things too. First, it was little things. She'd catch Jake looking at me when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She'd frown when he lingered too long in the kitchen while I was there. Once she even asked half-jokingly, "Is he bothering you, Mom?" I laughed it off, told her she was imagining things. But inside, my nerves were unraveling. Then one evening, I walked into the living room to find her sitting on the couch, her phone in her lap, her face pale. "Mom," she said slowly, looking up at me. "I think Jake is lying to me." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, chewing on her lip. "I was on his laptop earlier, just looking something up. And I found some messages." A cold wave washed over me. "What kind of messages?" She exhaled shakily. "To some girl. Calling her baby. Telling her he misses her." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't about me anymore. Jake was playing a game. And Emma, the one person I had been trying to protect, was finally starting to see it. "Did you confront him?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not yet. But I will." My heart pounded. I knew Jake. He wasn't the type to get caught so easily. If Emma had found something, it was because he wanted her to. And that meant one thing. The real game was just beginning. That night, Emma waited up for him. She sat on the couch, arms crossed, jaw tight, the laptop open beside her. When he finally walked in, his usual cocky grin on his face, she didn't waste any time. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, spinning the screen toward him. His expression barely flickered. He glanced at the messages, then back at her, completely unfazed. "Babe, come on," he said smoothly. "You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." Emma's eyes burned with anger. "Then explain these messages, Jake. Who is she?" He let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. "You're overreacting." I watched from the kitchen, heart pounding. I should have stepped in. I should have said something. But I wanted to see how he'd handle this. "I'm overreacting?" Emma's voice shook. "Are you serious right now?" Jake sighed. "Fine. You want the truth." He leaned in slightly, voice lowering. "I was never talking to another girl. I was testing you." Emma blinked. "What?" "I wanted to see if you trusted me, if you'd go through my things. And now I know." He shook his head, feigning disappointment. "You don't." For a moment, she just stared at him, completely thrown. Then she scoffed, standing up. "That's the dumbest excuse I've ever heard." He didn't flinch. "If you don't believe me, then maybe we're not right for each other." The shift was subtle, but I saw it. The way Emma hesitated. The way doubt flickered across her face. Jake was manipulating her. twisting the truth. And it was working. I couldn't stand there any longer. "That's enough," I said, stepping into the room. Jake turned, his expression unreadable. Emma looked at me, her eyes full of frustration and something else, confusion. "Mom, stay out of this," she said. But I shook my head. "No, I can't." Jake's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. He knew exactly what he was doing. And in that moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about Emma. This was about control. And he wasn't going to stop until he had all of it. After that night, everything shifted. Emma didn't break up with Jake. Not immediately. He was too good at twisting things, at making her second-guess herself. But I could see the doubt in her eyes now, the cracks in the illusion. And Jake knew it too. The following week, things became unbearable. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. Jake still watched me when Emma wasn't looking. Still found little ways to invade my space, to remind me that he was always there. But something was different now. He was more careful, more controlled, like he knew the game was coming to an end. One evening, Emma came to me, her face pale. "Mom," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid he'd hear. "I think he's been in my phone." A chill ran through me. "What?" "I changed my passcode last night. And today he made a joke about something I texted my friend. Something he couldn't have known unless..." She trailed off, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. I exhaled slowly. "Emma, you need to end this." She looked up at me, her expression pained. "I know." That night I barely slept. A storm raged outside, wind howling against the windows, and inside my mind spun with the realization that this was it. It was coming to a head. And I was right. At exactly 2:47 a.m., I woke to a sound. A soft creak. The sound of my bedroom door opening. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. A shadow moved in the darkness. Slow. Intentional. Jake. I could feel him there, standing at the foot of my bed, just watching. For a second I thought I might scream. But then he whispered something. Something so quiet, so chilling that it turned my blood to ice. "I win." I bolted upright, reaching for the lamp. But by the time the light flooded the room, he was gone. The next morning, Emma woke up to a text from Jake. "Jake, I'm leaving town. Take care." No explanation. No apology. Just gone. She cried for days, but deep down I think she knew. She knew he had been playing her. Playing both of us. And I knew something even worse. Jake hadn't really left. Not forever. Because sometimes late at night I still feel it. That presence. That knowing. Like he's still watching. Like the game isn't over. Not yet.